So good morning, everybody, and thank you for taking some time out of your morning to join us for the Watershed Resilience, Climate Change, Collaboration and Landscape Restoration Virtual Symposium. I am the director of the Comox Valley Land Trust and Conservation Partnership, which is one of the hosts of this event today. And just for a few of you that may not be familiar, the Comox Valley Conservation Partnership is an umbrella organization that brings together 26 different local ENGO stewardship groups into one common forum where we can discuss issues and look for solutions to environmental problems. And so we work collaboratively with local governments and other partners in the valley here, typically to encourage environmental policies and strategies. And so putting on a symposium like this is a part of our common practice for sort of elevating everybody's best practices around environmental protection here in the valley and beyond. I want to mention also that one of the partners of the Conservation Partnership, one of the steering committee members is Megan Kersons, who's the executive director of the Cumberland Community Forest Society. And she will be, which is also a co-host of this event. And she will be joining us today and MC for the second half of this morning's session. And you've, I think, met already Tina Willard-Steppen and Kara McHugh, who are on the backside running the symposium for us, and my sincere thanks to them for their help. Tina, have you already touched on the housekeeping stuff while we got started? You have? Great. Okay, then we can move right past that. And without any further ado, I would like to welcome, actually, Tina, if you could pass the controls to Kayla to host for the next few slides, that would be fantastic. And without any further ado, I would like to introduce Wedledi Speck, who has joined us here today to speak on a couple of points, the Couscous project that we're going to be looking at. But first, he will welcome us to the Comox territory. Wedledi is the hereditary chief of the Aixen Katemut clan in particular, and is a cultural advisor, a speaker, storyteller, and spiritual leader who understands the importance of traditional knowledge, transfer of traditional knowledge, and traditional decision making. So we're extremely lucky to have Wedledi joining us today. And again, he will be a panelist on the second part of this morning's session, but at the moment, I would like him to just offer some opening remarks for us. So Wedledi, if you will, and please remember to unmute yourself.
Good morning, everyone. I want to begin by welcome you to the traditional territory of the Puntledge, Aixen, and Comox peoples. Just to place emphasis and punctuate the Puntledge, as this is their historical territory and has been for many thousands of years. The Aixen tribe joined them in about 1830. Their traditional territory was Campbell River, went over to Quadra Island and south right down to Point Holmes. Their marriages between, was say, the Puntledge and Aixen for many generations, and also the Comox, whose traditional territory was from Salmon River down to Campbell River. They moved to this territory in about between 1845 and 1850. And so these are the three particular cultural groups that live in this territory known as the Comox Valley. Being a cultural person, and I have a tendency to follow cultural traditions, and so I acknowledge the Puntledge as the traditional owners of this. I think it's really important to understand that that the Puntledge ancestors, Hiquitin and Quayamin, came from above. They landed in the Comox Valley, and they are the ancestors, the two ancestors of the people. And so as they began to grow, they occupied the territory all the way from Qualicum, all the way up to, say, what we know as the Comox Valley, and out to Point Holmes. They had winter villages up by Condensery, and also down by the old hotel. And so it's really important to know, say, that the land and the territory often reflect the people who own it. And so this is the way that we find this territory. The language of the Puntledge was Salish, and it was a variation of what we know as Aya Jutham, which is what Comox speaks. They were very close in their way. But the people who speak closest to Puntledge are Qualicum and Sechelt. And so this particular language has a little bit of a variation on how they pronounce things. For instance, in Ayazutham, the Comox, the proper way of saying couscousum would be chusum. Chusum translates to be like it's oily on the rocks. It's like fat, and so the Puntledge have a variation of that pronunciation. So I think you can get away with calling it couscousum, but the way that we refer to it as huhusum, and so it generates the perceptions or the relationship that the Puntledge have with the territory. As around 1876. The federal government began to make decisions for Indigenous people, and they're the ones that called the three groups Comox, and that has been the common known name since that time, but it's properly Puntledge, Aixen, and Comox. And so when we're looking at this, is that the territory, the families that are Puntledge today are Kerry Frank, he's the chief of the Puntledge, Rob Everson, and Bruce Billy. They're the three families that are Puntledge today, and so we acknowledge them and the territory in that way. So I wanted to talk a little bit about that, just to give you some background and give you a sense of how important cultural it is to speak to the tribes and to the ancestors and to the relationship the ancestors have to the land. And so I'm not sure if you want any more of that, but welcome, and I welcome you into this house of knowing.
Thank you very much, Fredletty. That's beautiful. We really appreciate that. Wonderful way to set us up for the rest of the day. And this first morning session really is going to be doing a bit of a deep dive in the Couscousum, if I can say that right, project here in the Comox Valley. This is a very important project that involves both ecosystem restoration, but also reconciliation between the First Nations people and settler communities here in the Comox Valley. And rather than do much more to introduce it, our first speaker to the topic is also Wedletty, and he needs to leave in a little while for another engagement. So I'll invite Wedletty back to speak more about this important project. And then following that, we will be joined by Doug Hillian. Doug is representing the city of Courtenay as the liaison to this project. He's a councillor with the city of Courtenay who's been on council, I think, doing his fourth term at the moment, and is also on the CVRD board of directors. Doug has over 45 years of experience as a social worker and a community justice professional, working in the nonprofit sector and with the provincial government, local and regional governments. We're so lucky to have Doug on the Couscousum team. His wisdom and experience continue to really ground our project in very important ways. And actually, Doug is going to sort of be co-presenting alongside Kayla Holbrook. Kayla comes to Project Watershed with over 10 years of experience and has been with Project Watershed for over 10 years and has been involved in really all aspects of the organization, including project coordination and grant writing and public education. So we're really happy to have Kayla on this project. Her energy and enthusiasm has proven to be one of the key ingredients to success here. So we'll move right along, but one thing I want to say really quickly before we do is that we had a very exciting weekend in the Couscous Project world, where we were joined by the Premier John Horgan on Sunday, alongside myself and Nicole Rempel, the chief of the Comox First Nation, where Mr. Horgan announced that if elected, the provincial government will be providing all of the outstanding funds required to buy this property. And that is the sort of next step before we can get going on restoration. So we're extremely happy about that commitment and look forward to moving forward with this fantastic project. So that's it for me, and I'm going to pass it back again to Wedledi to start off, just for the remaining few moments that you have with us today to speak a little bit more about the Couscous project. And just Wedledi, for your sake, it is 9:15, so you've got plenty of time. And just unmute yourself there. Great.
Great. There we go. Yes. Thanks for helping with that. Yes. And thanks for putting up this very important map. I want to again begin by saying that an interesting element to the culture of the Vancouver Island Salish people, especially in northern Vancouver Island, historically we called ourselves Satlut. 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 And so in any case, the ancestor of that particular group was called Saltcom, and they began to politically organize, and so all the 16 tribes of what we know as the North Vancouver Island Salish people lived under that banner, and so in about 1800 they started to break apart, and there was one tribe in particular started potlatching and wanted to take control, and when they did, they changed the name from Satlut to Comox, but only 5 tribes agreed to do that, and so they became known as the 5 tribes of the Comox Whalehouse, and all others remained Satlut, and they aligned themselves actually with the Likwukta and potlatched and had other kind of ceremonies with them. And so the Puntledge were outside that, and the Puntledge had a lot of marriage, was they with the Likwukta, and so a lot of the language of the Puntledge was actually Kwakwala. So they had this really interesting amalgam, this mixing of cultures, and so oftentimes in the spot right across from where Couscous was, there was a number of houses that actually belonged, or a little further up by the top end of the map, where the Likwukta had big houses there. And but they were those people that were related to the Nimnim family. And I just want to say that a little bit. And so one of the important pieces around the territory was that the Ford house, the family, they had married into a chief's daughter from Fort Rupert, and that family moved down to where we see that property now, and so they were Indigenous people, and so the Qualicum Tom. And also we'll say the what do you call them? Well, the descendants of the Ford family are from that Indigenous marriage and relationship from Fort Rupert, and so they were closely related to the Comox people. So it's not surprising that they had their land was where they are, and their house was where they are. And so the Ford boys who were raised in the territory, they married into the Kwakwala people and other Salish people as well. So they're the generations of people, and they're still consider themselves relatives. So important. It's important to know these kind of histories. And but I want to say that what's important about this is that the Couscous territory just below, say, where the sawmill was a known tree burial site. According to Mary Clifton, who was interviewed in the 80s, said that it was actually before her mother's time. So when I started to track that backwards, I started to look at, well, Mary was born in 1900. Her mother was born in right 1870, 1877, and then the mother before would have been, let's say, around 1850, right? So we know in around times between 1850 backwards that they were used as a site to honor their ancestors. And so the way we did things around in our culture, tree burials were where we had this. It's like you can imagine a coffin-sized box, which was a bent box, would hold, let's say, the ancestors, and they were placed in trees, and they would be there for a long time. The favorite place to do that was put them in spruce trees, and they had the big, thicker branches, and people would be housed there, and they would over the years mummify, and as a period of time, let's say, when the wind blew, and eventually they would fall to the land and become part of the land. And so when our people talk about our ancestors being one with the land, there's a reference to that, and that's really important. And so to us is that it's a manifestation of our ancestors. When people first dropped from the myth world to this world, they took costumes off and became human. And one story I'd like to just quickly share with you is that Yakantlalis was a whale, and this whale went all around the world. And one day went up to a beach and stepped out of his costume and sent the costume back. And he turned to the land and said that my name is going to be Klalis, and your name is going to be Klaladi. And then he proceeded to build a house there. And on the house, he put a crest of a whale. And Klaladi means the place of whales. And Klalis means that he's now a stranded whale. That's the beginning of civilization for him. So he became human at that time. And so what ends up happening is that the place of whales are the place in which all his descendants will know where they come from. So it's a place that's named after him. And so, this is the way our people were, is that the identity, culture, and their rights were embedded into the landscape. And so really important stuff, right? And so when we talk about events, about what was happening, I suspect we'll say that the salmon were harvested in that area as well. And a lot of the rendering of the salmon would create that slick, that they're talking about. And hukusum or couscousum would reflect that practice. That's a place where we do our fish, And although there were a number of sites, fishweir sites along the river, there were particular areas, we'll say, that some families preferred, we'll say, to do their salmon, and that was important. Each fishweir were owned by a particular family member, and the head chief was always the first one to open up ceremony. We didn't look at it as saying that the mouth of the river was separate from Couscousum. It was a part of the same, part of the whole. And we have a word in our language which we say awitnakula, which means to be one with heaven, the air, land, the sea, and everything in it. That dictates our relationship or our perspective on land and territory and use, right? And so it was important for us to be able to carry that wisdom and hand that wisdom down to our children, so that when they become adults, how they use the land would be reflective of the values of the people and their desire to be one with it, because if we mistreated the territory, they had a way of coming out of balance and not doing what we'd like to do. And so Couscousum historically was a really important burial place. It was a place to mark, we'll say, that the end journey of our ancestors, but it also marked, we'll say, the end journey of salmon, because man, they were really good to eat, and things like that. So these ideas and these concepts that I've just briefly introduced you to are really important in terms of our reconciliation and our decolonization. You know, it's important for us to take the time to not only to know our songs and know our stories, but is to see how those stories relate to the environment around us. And when the government of Canada said that we were Comox, that's colonization. And when I go back and acknowledge the traditional territory of the Puntledge, that's decolonization. You know, and if I put second to that, the introduction of the Aixen, that's decolonization. If I talk about the Comox coming third and to be a part of this cultural family in the valley, that's decolonization. Right? The more we tell the truth and the more we tell our chronologies and the more we tell our history in the way that our ancestors told it, we are becoming closer to our healing and closer to our relationships to the land in which have been a part of our from the beginning of time. If you can ever get to Chrome Island and look at the ancestral image, we'll say, of the Puntledge, it's riveting, right? Majority of our teachings say that a lot of these petroglyphs is dated back to 4,700 years. You know, knowing that that practice has been around that long, but it's telling us something, right? And it's a story stone, and carved into that is this history that is really important to us.
Thank you so much, Letty. That's just an amazing knowledge that you've shared with us about this important site and this important project. Appreciate the time that you've taken with us this morning. Thank you so much.
Yes, and thank you, Gal. Thank you, everyone, for doing this work. It's really important work.
Fantastic. We'll see you soon.
Take care. Yeah.
So yeah, just to follow up on what Letty was saying, this project has really been very heavily influenced and supported by the Comox First Nation as we move through the acquisition and restoration of the site. And I know that Kayla will be speaking much more about that. So I will invite, I think, Doug Hillian first, if I have that right, Kayla, to speak. So Doug, please remember to unmute yourself, and we'll turn things over to you.
Thanks very much, everyone. I just want to first acknowledge what a privilege it is to live and work on the unceded traditional territory of the Comox First Nation. I want to acknowledge the Pentlatch, the Aixen, and Comox, and all the original peoples that have lived here for thousands of years. And I also want to acknowledge all of you for the journeys that you've taken to be here this morning, and I appreciate you giving your time to be part of this amazing event. Thanks to all of the people who've organized it to celebrate the incredibly important work that we're all doing together. It falls to me to speak about the history of European settlement in this area. And as most of you probably know, the first Europeans arrived here in the 1860s, and by the 1870s, we actually see buildings and the construction of a mill and the start of the river as the avenue of the community, the commercial riverway that brings the goods and the services to the growing number of settlers who are living here. And the first development, the first bridge was actually constructed in 1874 across the river. And of course, any construction of that nature brings about changes, and so we gradually see the development that starts to influence how the river and the lands around it are shaped. We know that within 20 years, Joseph McPhee developed the land on the west side, planted 1,000 fruit trees, and opened a general store, and that was the beginnings of what we now call Courtenay. We know that as we move along, there's a creamery that's built, there are hotels, and there's about 200 people living here around the turn of the century. By the early part of the century of the 1900s, Courtenay becomes established as an actual municipality. It's interesting to note in the records that it was voted down a couple of times before the province actually incorporated the town in 1915. I guess the area that you're looking at on the map from that 1946 aerial picture shows the site as it was at that time. And I think we're going to move along and see some pictures of, this is the cannery that was established in the 30s. You can't really see the name on it, but it actually says Comox Valley Cooperative Producers Association. And that cannery operated for several years during the 30s and produced fruit and vegetables. This was obviously an agricultural community even then, despite the heavy reliance on logging and the mines out in Cumberland. Agriculture was important to the people who lived here. And the cannery site, we originally thought that it was where the sawmill is now, but there seems to be some discrepancy about that. And the suggestion is that it was actually located closer to where Parker Marine and the Budget rent-a-car business are now on what would be the city side of the now 17th Street Bridge. But interesting, when you look at the history of the cannery, even after it closed, I'm told by Lawrence Burns, our former fire chief, who knows more about the history of the city than anybody else, that as a young boy, he actually went to the cannery after it was closed, along with a number of families, and they packaged jam and jellies that were sent to Britain during the Second World War. So Lawrence had some interesting memories of that. He also understands that a laundry might have operated there for a while before that building eventually disappeared. Of course, later on, we get the development of Field Sawmill, and the sawmill was actually started up at the current site of Arden School in 1947, and it moved to this location in 49. And it became a productive mill for many, many years. It was whirring away there when I first moved to Courtenay in 1979, and people who went to the Old House restaurant were able to actually hear the noise of the mill as they sat there and dined. A lot of people worked there, including many Comox First Nation members. The mill operated right through the recession and the economic downturn of the 1980s, milling cedar for the Japanese market. It went through several changes of ownership, and as the market conditions fluctuated. And it was very much part of the landscape. Of course, we know all the harm that it's caused over the years, both to the river and to the site. And there were numerous efforts by citizens of Courtenay, particularly in the 1970s, to try and get it moved, because even then people realized that industrial activity on the river and the impact on the estuary was not a good thing. The sensibilities of turning our waterways into industrial highways, people realized what the devastation was that was being caused. But despite that, the mill did continue and was a productive source of employment right up until the time that it closed in about 2004. By this time, it was owned by Interfor, who continues to own the property to this day. They decommissioned the mill around 2006 and essentially tore it down. And this is what was left of the site, acres of concrete. it's significant to know that it's received a certificate of compliance, so that we know that we don't have to have the problem of toxic materials. That is one thing that is good to know, the remediation that has already taken place. And as our restoration project moves forward, that's one thing that we won't have to worry about. So I'm going to turn it over now to Kayla to talk about where things have gone from here. And I just, in doing that, I'll be back with you a little later on. I just want to say what an honor it's been to be involved in this project. It's been a number of years now that we've been working together, Comox First Nation, Project Watershed, and the city. And it's one of the great privileges of my life to see this project through to the completion that I know we're going to have in the next short while. So thanks.
Okay, thank you, Doug. I too would like to acknowledge all the peoples that have come before, and Project Watershed is very happy that we've had the opportunity to work in the Comox Valley, the unceded territory of the Comox people. I'd like to again thank Doug and Wedletty for that rich cultural context. I'm going to now give us some environmental context. This is a map of the watersheds of the Comox Valley. All of the water and salmonids that come from those upper watersheds, the grayed out watersheds, actually have to pass right by the Cuscusan site. As well, any saltwater or adult salmon that are coming in from the ocean have to pass directly by that site, making the location of the Cuscusan property critical in the salmon migration corridor of these watersheds. And it really shows how connected this one property is to much of the Comox Valley. Not only is it directly connected to these watersheds, but also the watersheds that empty into the estuary. It's also very important in terms of the floodplain. So all of that water coming from the upper watersheds, this is the floodplain for that area, and much of the development that has happened over time has actually caused us to cut off the river from the floodplain, which causes events such as flooding. And as we know, flooding events are going to get more severe and more frequent due to climate change. So this will be a real issue for our community to look into. Now, the work that we do at Cuscusan will not alleviate all this flooding. However, it will help attenuate the localized flooding right around the site. When the wall was erected, it actually encroached on the river. So it tightened, it squeezed the river in, and any waters, floodwaters, etc., that are coming down from the upper watersheds get pushed over onto the other properties across the water. And locals, the old house, have both suffered, as well as other properties, major flooding issues and damages. So removing that wall, allowing the waters to spread out over the property, will again attenuate that localized flooding and gives us the opportunity in the future to reconnect with the floodplain, with the fields of the floodplain through Cuscusan, if we can. So it gives us an opportunity for future flood mitigation as well. So here's an image of the Comox Estuary. Right underneath the Y in Courtney, that's where Cuscusan is located. And you can really see how it is a pinch point or a gatekeeper for those upper watersheds here, being a gateway to the ocean. Now, the Comox Estuary is a very large estuary, and with the Bain Sound, it is a very productive space. It's known to be very productive for shellfish and salmon, etc., throughout North America, actually. So the Comox Estuary is a very important place. And actually, Ducks Unlimited has classified it as a Class 1 estuary. Only 8 of the 323 estuaries that are on the coastline of BC have a status of Class 1. And that's again because of the size of the area, the productivity. We have a huge amount of herring spawn that happens here, as well as it's in an important bird area. So lots of birds migrate through this area. And this being such a productive habitat, and being so large, gives lots of room for a variety of flora and fauna to really flourish. So here we have, and many of which are endangered or threatened. So it's a very unique place, and it's home to a lot of unique and important plants and animals. One of which is fish. So salmon, this is Chinook salmon, steelhead and cutthroat. as I mentioned, they go right by the Cuscusum site. And the Cuscusum site not only provides them no habitat, but it also is a hindering, it's almost like a gauntlet. For the wall acts, seals have been known to use the wall. They place their young along the top of the wall, along the top of the water at the wall. And then the mother seals can scare those salmon into the wall. They will go up and right into the mouths of those baby seals, making it a very effective way to catch salmon. But again, it's very hazardous for salmon, both adult salmon going upstream and young salmon coming down to the river, to the estuary. Now this map shows that Cuscusum is not, the work that we do at Cuscusum is not done in a void or by itself. It will be very connected to the properties, the conservation properties and restoration properties that are in the area, providing habitat connectivity, which gives room for species as things shift due to climate change, and gives them the ability to move between foraging and nesting, etc. habitats. So it really helps us make a connected habitat for the whole area of the Comox Estuary. In addition to being great habitat and providing space for a variety of species, it's also a carbon sink. It has been found that saltmarsh species, which have extremely high growth rates, sequester somewhere in the realms of 2 to 6 times more carbon than mature old growth forests, such as in Cathedral Grove. And as the property looks like this at the moment, you can see that it's not really providing any habitat values or any of the eco-asset values that it could, which is really what we're working towards. Now, a lot of this came out in the symposium in 2008, the Heart of the Watershed Symposium, where we took a look at the estuary, and it became apparent how important this estuary was, how important Cuscusum was, then called Field Sawmill, and how we really needed to take the lead in restoring this important place. So Project Watershed has done this under the banner of keeping it living, which actually comes from a Kwakiutl word, Kwakwalakwa, which is from Chief Adam Dick. And it is kind of a First Nations idea of sustainability. It means instead of having a zero impact, we actually have a positive long-term relationship with our local environment. And that's really what we're working towards with Cuscusum and all of the projects that happen within the estuary. And that's why we took, right after the symposium, we took a good look at the whole estuary and looked at all the different restoration, protection, conservation projects that could happen, so that we were looking at a bigger picture and had a strategy for restoring the area and bringing that historic abundance to the estuary and to our valley. Project Watershed. So once we had a confident, experienced team, we decided to go forward with the Cuscusum project. And that happened. We had a strong board. We had Tim Ennis come to us. He has worked and done a project very similar to this in Bakey Slough. There was a log sort there that was, again, pretty much a habitat void. And they did a lot of work returning that successfully to estuarine habitat. So today we have beautiful, productive estuarine habitat right up in the Campbell River estuary. And that's exactly, or very similar to what we'd like to do here. So in our early days of putting this project together, we worked with an artist and he came up with this image. This is an artist rendering and it's not exactly what the site will look like, but it gives you an idea that once restored, this site will provide a variety of habitat values, recreation values, etc., and be an integrated part of the landscape. Right south of the property, we're lucky that there is Hollyhock Flats area, which is a conservation area, and it can provide a template for what we want Cuscusum to look like. So this is hopefully very similar to what Cuscusum will look up like once it's restored, integrating right in with the Hollyhock Flats area. This slide is just to show what native fauna look beside a stream, and this is what we're going to be using as somewhat of a template, this idea of going from smaller plants all the way up to bigger conifers. But to do that, to start a restoration, the first part of our project is to remove the concrete. There's over 8.3 acres of concrete. It is a foot deep in places with rebar going through it. So this makes this part of the project one of the most expensive parts of the project. However, once it's removed, we will be able to regrade the site and create a more natural set of elevations. So this is our latest image showing the elevations as we plan to create them. What we can see here, so I'll get my pointer. Here, as you can see, it's a depression. This is not a pretty picture because we have just started working on this, and we will have some nicer pictures in a little bit. But right here, there's a depression. So this will be a pond that is always wetted with streams connecting it back to the river. And then after that, we have a step up here, and we have a benched area that will be tidally influenced. And so we will plant saltmarsh species there that can tolerate salt intrusion. So this is just some idea of saltmarsh plants that are growing right next door at the Hollyhock Flats area. And then up here, as we go up in elevation, we get up to an area where there might be some saltwater intrusion. At high tides, there might be some saltwater that gets there, and so that's an area where we'll plant some more shrub-like plants. And then in the upper areas, right in those, I'll go back there, right in the green areas up here, this should not be tidally influenced. And in this location, we'll be able to plant bigger species of trees. And as you can see in some of the images, these plants will not only be native, but many of them have cultural significance. This here is a Sitka spruce. Spruce is something that Wedletty mentioned as housing those burial trees originally on the property. And then just before we get off this slide, I'd like to call your attention to this here. Historically, the Dyke Slough, which is up here, did connect back through to the river, which is quite important because without that connection, it's a blind channel, so that any salmon, etc., that get into this area and are being chased by seals have really nowhere to go. And so connecting the channel back is part of the plans of this project, even though we're not going to do it right on the property. It looks like that's going to have to be done next door on the Hollyhock Flats area or in the right-of-way that's there. We will be connecting the channel, we'll reconnect this channel to the Courtenay River so that there is that flow-through ability. And of course, the wall has got to go, but it's going to be last. We are going to keep the wall in place because it provides an important function. While we do any work on the property, it keeps back any soil, etc., so that it doesn't influence or negatively affect the river. And once we've done the work on the property and those elements have started to settle and really get roots and are stronger, we can remove that wall. Likely, it will have to be done on a barge crane system. Could be done by land. However, of course, we just restored that habitat, so it's more likely to happen in this manner. Again, this is a very important project, and it has so many different benefits. A ton of habitat gains, of course. It's over 8.3 acres of property of potential habitat, flood attenuation, climate change mitigation, and all this, of course, provides for very rich education and recreational opportunities, as well as what Doug's going to talk more to, this idea of reconciliation or reconciliation. So really us taking some actions that will put reconciliation into work, into place. And maybe that's why this project has been met with so much excitement from our community and support. We've raised over $3 million now of the $6.5 million that we have estimated it will cost to purchase and restore the property. And really, people from all walks of life have joined in donating funds and time and energy towards this project. And that's kind of where I'm going to leave it. And then I'm going to pass it over to Doug to talk more about the city's involvement and reconciliation more on that governmental level and what the future looks like for Couscoussum.
Thanks, Kayla. And you know, as you're talking, I just find myself thinking about the many steps that have been involved in this process. And I remember one of the opening events on the grounds of what's now Locals, used to be the old house, which is where that picture was taken. I remember speaking that day about the irony that we're actually having to purchase land that was originally taken by settlers from the First Nations, and we're having to purchase it to restore it. The irony of that doesn't escape us, but nonetheless, we deal with the world as we find it, and so we've developed this partnership. You'll see Paul Horgan there, along with Chief Haggis Rempel and myself, on the shores of the river, looking across at the site. And the partnership and the relationships that have developed as we've been working on this have, I believe, been an example of reconciliation in action. We've worked together every step of the way, and the plan was strategic, because it was important that we acknowledge the First Nation entitlement to the land. But in order to actually restore the land, there are certain grants that only a municipality is eligible for. So because of that, we developed a plan that involved co-ownership of the land once it was purchased from Interfor between Comox First Nation and the city of Courtenay, with Comox having 51% and Courtenay 49%. The intent is that eventually it will be 100% owned by Comox First Nation. And of course, there'll be a covenant that will be developed that will preserve the land from any future development. So we've been working towards this end. The challenge has been, of course, raising money to purchase the land. There's not much of that available, and hats off to Tim Ennis, who's come up with so many different places to look for grants. We've been successful in many areas. We received $1 million from the province of BC, and lots of meetings with our MLA and cabinet ministers to make that come to fruition. We now have the promise of further funds from the province, because we haven't yet secured anything from the federal government. We believe restoration money will be there from them, but we're still hoping that they might kick in towards the actual purchase. But what we're working on right now, as we move towards the final purchase, is a management agreement for the actual co-management of the site, because of course, while the restoration work goes on, there's also going to be the maintenance of the site. And so the city will be involved with Comox First Nation and Project Watershed in developing that management agreement. And I think you can look forward to many exciting announcements in the days to come as we go through the different stages of that. And I personally can't wait until we see the large diggers lifting up that dreadful concrete so that we can start planting and seeing this site come back to life again. I want to acknowledge there you see Don Castleton from Project Watershed, along with Chief Rempel and Mayor Wells at the signing ceremony when the Memorandum of Understanding was first signed. And that's in the Comox Nation Administration Building. Again, one of the many events, memorable events that have been part of this process. I just want to acknowledge that when I spoke earlier about some of the early families that were here, you'll notice as you drive around Courtenay and the Comox Valley that a lot of the roads and places are named for the original settlers. And one of the things that Wendy Moran, who I know is on the call today, my colleague at Courtenay Council, and I are pleased to acknowledge, is that we've been meeting with the Comox First Nation in relation to the update of our official community plan, and making sure that we're involved in government-to-government consultations regarding that process. And one of the things that we want to start doing is acknowledging place and the naming that goes with that, and to build our First Nations heritage into the fabric of how we name and organize our city. And so that's another step that I think is a byproduct of this process. we also have a resolution coming forward in the coming weeks where we're going to recognize the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People and incorporate that into our official community plan, along with the training of our staff and how we frame our planning processes and our documentation of that. So a lot of exciting things that are happening, I can't underestimate the importance of the Couscous project and all the work that's been involved in the process of reconciliation, because we're able to point to this as a successful partnership where we're restoring the land, we're restoring the rights, we're restoring the relationship. As I've said, it's one of the great privileges of my life to be involved in this work, and I think we all will have a lot of reason to celebrate as we see the Comox First Nation grow in cultural strength, in economic strength, and in the restoration of the land that they have cared for so many years. I'm not sure if there's anything more that I have to say right now, Kayla and Tim, but you can cue me if you think I've forgotten anything significant.
Mm-hmm. Thank you so much, Doug, and thank you also, Kayla. Amazing presentation, and I think it really leaves with us a strong impression of the fact that this is a restoration project on one hand, but very much integrally a reconciliation project in our community, and that has really come to the foreground on this project like none other that I've ever been involved with. We have a few minutes before we would normally jump to questions, and given that we have a little bit of extra time, I have put together a very brief slideshow just to show some of the images of the project that we worked on in the Campbell River Estuary, which we mentioned early on today was sort of a analogous project to this one. And I think it's interesting to see this because one might ask the question, how is this restoration even really possible? It seems so daunting. So just in a few minutes here, I will show you an example of this work in the Campbell River. Much like the field sawmill site, the Campbell River Estuary had been used fairly extensively historically in an industrial context, primarily oriented around logging and water transport of logs to mill sites in more distant areas. But eventually those mill sites caught up and were built on the estuary of the Campbell River. And by about the early 90s, the DFO biologists had noted that 86% of the land in the estuary had been industrially converted to industrial land uses, and that was having a major impairment on salmon populations, with particular reference to Chinook salmon that spend an unusually longer period of time in the estuary than other salmon species do. What Campbell River basically did under the leadership of their local government was they established an estuary management committee, an estuary management plan. Following that was directing land use to industrial land use out of the estuary as opportunities allowed. So in the year 2000, the major sawmill closed down, and the Nature Conservancy of Canada, working with other partners, was able to acquire the land and begin raising restoration funds. So that's kind of like this, where we're at in this project right now. And so this is what it looked like at peak production. And I'm going to flip forward one screen, which hopefully will show you sort of a Google image that mimics this one of what the land looks like now. And I've tried to orient it so that it sort of matches, but keep your eye on the major bay here in the mill pond that's completely muddy, for example, and that's sort of where we're at these days. So you can see that there's quite a remarkable transformation here, night and day, really. This is a publicly available space, so people that are interested can go and visit this part of the estuary. Here it is looking from the top down. And so, what's really interesting about this site is that certain parts of it are very similar to the situation that we find ourselves in with Couscous right now, in terms of having that big metal wall in the forefront, filled in the back, concrete on top. And so we've been able to really do a lot of work there. This is an example of the Ocean Blue sawmill, one of the 3 sawmills that was on the property that we worked on. And again, you can see that retaining wall there. And of course, the logs booming intertidally up and down every day, grinding away what used to be salt marsh habitat underneath for years and years and years. But this is what that looks like. Kayla showed a great photo of one of the big trucks that can pull up that concrete and break out that rebar using magnets, which is pretty cool. We'll hope to recycle that material. It makes really good roadbed material, I'm told. But then, yeah, a lot of big yellow trucks, some orange ones too, will be on the property, causing all kinds of traffic dilemmas for a matter of months, probably, while we're resculpting the land, moving fill around, and of course, very careful attention paid to making sure sedimentation doesn't enter the water course. Ultimately, once the land is resculpted, and Kayla showed some great sort of digital imagery of what that will look like, then it comes time to plant the appropriate species, as Kayla mentioned. And the way that you do that is you go to an adjacent intact part of the estuary and you very carefully extract lumps of plant matter from that natural habitat in a very spaced out fashion, so that those holes will fill in naturally again over time. And you move those clumps of sedges and rushes to your planting site. That's hard to do because you're working in a very muddy intertidal environment, but Project Watershed's become extremely good at this, given the other estuary restoration projects that we've done throughout the valley. A lot of volunteer opportunities will be forthcoming at this stage. Those plants, once planted, need to be protected. Most of you probably have seen the Canada goose issue that we have here in the Georgia Basin. That's definitely impacting the Comox Estuary as well as the Campbell. So this fencing is temporary, and it keeps the Canada geese away until the plants have time to establish. That's sort of another location. And then this is what, in the case of the Campbell, what that industrial sawmill site looks like today. And to be quite honest, it's very difficult to tell that there was ever an industrial use of that site previously. And it's been a real joy for me personally, being so involved with this project, to watch the juvenile Chinook salmon floating in on a flood tide in the spring, feeding in this habitat right here around your gumboots as you're watching them come in, and really thinking back to when this was just an absolute toxic mud sludge pile. And so I know that because we've done it there very effectively, I know that the Couscous site, we will have success there too. And so that's all I really wanted to say, and I'm very happy now to pass things over for some questions from the audience. And I haven't been watching the chat box so much in the last 5 minutes or so, so I'm going to have just a quick scan here. There's a question from Ken McDonald. What impact will the sewage force main project have on Couscous? I can speak to that because I'm also on the Liquid Waste Management Planning Public Advisory Committee, by coincidence, here in the city of Courtenay, CVRD. And where that project is at right now is looking at what's called conveyance. So at the moment, sewer force main comes from the city of Courtenay underneath the river and pops up at a building adjacent to the Couscous property. Unfortunately, we will not be able to reconnect a channel from Couscous across that sewer force main to Hollyhock Marsh because the depth of the pipe is too shallow. We've talked about the possibility of lowering that pipe, but I believe it to be it's cost prohibitive essentially, and it's nowhere near the end of its life cycle. However, from there, the pump station that you see on the side of Dyke Road moves sewage all the way along the estuary's foreshore, right to underneath the bluff complex there at Willamar Bluffs, and up to the sewer treatment plant from there. That's an extremely environmentally hazardous way of moving raw sewage around in our environment. And we know that pipe, where it goes along the base of Willamar Bluffs, has a 50% chance of being ruptured by a log or a big rock in a storm event. So that entire section of pipe is going to be removed, and there will be basically an options that they're looking at now are directional drilling or overland options to move that sewage pipe right out of the estuary. So in the near future, we won't even have sewer force mains in the estuary anymore, which is fantastic. Just looking down for any other questions. Here's one from Jan. How will the work at Kuskusum affect the flooding upriver around the Lewis Park area? What work is needed upriver to reduce flooding, or is it time to retreat from those areas? How about maybe if I pass that one off to Kayla? Do you feel comfortable? Where did Kayla go?
Yep, I'm here.
Oh, there you are. Thank you.
So that's a big question. And it's something that I know the city of Courtenay, so Doug, if you want to jump in as well, has been working on for a long time. The work that we do at Kuskusum, as I mentioned, it will help, I think, mitigate that flooding, because again, once that river has more space to spread out, you can get more water in a flood situation going by the area. So that will help in some regards mitigate that flooding. But really, the other options have to be looked at to alleviate that.
Yeah, and if I can jump in, Kayla, we've been working with the Ministry of Highways for some years. They own the bypass road, which runs from the Superstore area to 17th Street. And they're going to be working on a project to sort the traffic flow along there, along with some intersection improvements. But as part of that, there'll also be some flood mitigation work, because for some years we've been aware that the road works effectively as a dike. And if we can provide some access for the waters to get to the fields, which have been their natural floodplain, that will also help to alleviate the flooding. But certainly flood mitigation with the Kuskusum site is a significant interest for all of us, and it's one of the many benefits of this project.
Great, thanks for that, Doug. And we have a question here from David Stapley. What were the different and common interests of the three partners, and how will they be accommodated in the management agreement and covenant for the site? That's a great question. I've done a lot of talking. How about I ask maybe Doug to step back in on that one?
Yeah, that is a good question. You know, the answer to that is still in formation, because we're actually continuing to work on the management agreement for the site. You know, the main interest of the city, I think, is well, I can summarize it in a few points. Flood mitigation is already noted. Removal of a major aesthetic eyesore, the restoration of the land and the benefits to the fishery, of course, the people who live here and the people who come to visit, and the fact that they'll have the opportunity to look at it. There'll probably be some walking paths. So there's all sorts of aesthetic benefits. You know, one of the obstacles we had in the early stages was some people thought we should find a way of redeveloping the land because we don't have much in the way of industrial land in the city, and we lose tax revenue. We've actually picked up the tax bill for that land for the last several years, while Project Watershed has been holding the lease. But I've been very clear from the start that there's going to be no development on that land. You know, from a floodplain perspective, apart from anything else, it just doesn't make sense. And we also want it restored because not only is it good for the environment, but it's part of the legacy of the first peoples who lived here. And for Comox, the significance of the site means that it should be restored as much as possible to its natural state. So I think that we found a lot of common interest, and the objective of restoration was what we all had in common. the issues that we'll be working on as we develop a management agreement are really to do with the capacity and what the costs and what the tasks are that are going to be involved in actually maintaining the site, and how that can be best be carried out and by whom, recognizing that that will evolve as we actually have the site in our control and are able to grapple with what's involved.
Thank you. That's an excellent answer. And yeah, just to reiterate that, I think really all three partners are totally on the same page about where this project needs to go in terms of its future description and use. So we are really working very effectively and in common. There's a question, two more. I think we probably have time for two more. There's about 10 minutes, I think, left in our session here. I see there's a question from Wendy Morin, City of Courtenay Councillor, for Wedledi, which I can happily see here on my screen. So I know that Wedledi has joined us again. So Wedledi, I don't know if you can read this question in the chat box, but I will read it. It says, in the interest of reconciliation and considering his comments about the name Comox having colonial roots and wanting to decolonize language, what names does he suggest we use? Should we be using Puntledge rather than Comox? There you go. Take it away.
Yeah, that's a hornet's nest. I just want to be honest about it. Because what we have, we'll say, is the Indian Act gives life to what we call the Comox First Nation today. It has its roots in colonial Canada. And so what we have parallel to that are the cultural families of the Puntledge, Aïkson, and Comox. And so what we've been doing is that we've been developing and recognizing our families and bringing them back to life. We have a cultural revitalization project. So we've identified all the chiefs of the Puntledge, of all the Aïkson, and the Comox. And so part of our work right now is to strengthen them so that they can step back into their hereditary roles. We're not dismissing that the Comox First Nation is an entity. They are. They represent, we'll say, the members of the band who our membership is determined, we'll say, by the Indian Act. And then we have cultural families whose membership is determined by the hereditary chiefs and matriarchs. And so, what we're basically saying to the Comox First Nation is that they're the business agents for the Comox band. They are people who are speaking on behalf of some of the hereditary chiefs. They are into developing, we'll say, the reserve lands, but lands that, for instance, belong to the Aïkson or the Puntledge or hereditary chiefs of Comox really belong to the hereditary chiefs and their families. So you've got reserve lands and you've got traditional lands. And so I think if we are arriving at a place where we're communicating with a bit of clarity of how we want to relate to those traditional lands. For instance, if you want to speak about territories that from Point Holmes to Campbell River, you would talk to me. You know.
Fantastic.
Yeah, well, it doesn't belong to them. I've actually spoke to their treaty process officer and people and said that why are you talking about Aïkson lands? You're not talking to us. And so there's some internal works that we're dealing with, and I think that's just important for the world to know right now. And so when we like, it wouldn't be much for Doug, you and Megan and others to sit down with Kerry, Frank, Rob Everson, and Bruce Billy to talk about a relationship, right? And at the same time, we'll say with Nicole, right, Nikki, it's fine. I think the idea is that we want to move this. Nothing what we do internally should interfere with what we're doing externally. We need to fix this. And we need to develop relationships that are about restoring, we'll say, our relationship to the land in a really good way. There's no politics here. This is about, let's do some work, right? And I think you'll see, more people step into that.
Thank you so much, Wedledi. That's an excellent answer and a difficult thing to understand if you don't have the history as you do. There's one more question here. Where did it go? There it is, from Dory. This will be a question for Kayla, I think. The question is, what about the vulnerability of migrating salmon to seals hunting them even further up the river? I'm just not sure if that's migrating referring to out-migrating smolts or up-migrating adult spawners, but either way, I'll let Kayla handle that question.
So I think.
Oh, I think you're, there you go. Sorry, you were muted for a minute there.
Oh, okay. Okay, everyone can hear me?
Yeah.
Excellent. Okay, so there are seals chasing salmon in and around the estuary and up the river. The saltwater intrusion of the saltwater does go quite a ways up the Puntledge River. And so the thing about natural habitat is that it gives salmon a fighting chance. So there is opportunities for them to hide and forage and escape from seals, where places like Couscousin, when there's a solid wall, there is no opportunity for that. So the work we do at Couscousin will help remove an obstacle. All of the other restoration projects that we're doing up the river. So we've also looked at the Sims Park area and done a big restoration project there. So as the map that I showed in the beginning, there are a variety of projects within the estuary and that lower river area that we've done and are working towards to create more habitat and more opportunities for salmon to escape seals, whether it be opportunities to hide or flow through channels. The idea is that we're giving salmon that fighting chance, that ability to hide and escape from seals, whether it be in the estuary or in the river. And I think that's what most of our restoration projects, one of the focus of most of our restoration projects are. We've done that not only at Sims Park, but also again at the Air Park. So there was the Air Park Lagoon, which was very stagnant at one end. We've poked through, we've taken a channel, a pipe, and we've poked through the top end of that, allowing that area to flush, and again, allowing salmon to enter it at different tide heights and be able to flow through that area from the river into the lagoon and then back out to the estuary. So all of what we can do for salmon is create habitat and provide those opportunities for escape.
Great. Thank you, Kayla. That's an excellent answer there. And we look forward to the impact that this will have on the salmon populations. I would note, I kind of glossed over it before, but in my report out about the Campbell River estuary, I mentioned how 86% of the land base had become industrialized. What we did was a bit of a historical analysis, and we really noted that there was a big fall down in the amount of salt marsh habitat, in particular in that estuary. And as I mentioned before, salt marsh habitat is really central to out-migrating smolts in the spring, particularly of Chinook. And of course, Chinook are the main food source for orcas and other things in the marine environment. And so by restoring that habitat, we're really having a positive impact on the Chinook populations. And what's important, of course, here in our system is that we have a summer run of Chinook that's an endangered run, genetically distinct from the fall Chinook. So we've done a lot of work here in the river to try and restore the habitat in stream for Chinook, but there's only sort of so much you can do without addressing the estuary itself. And so we've noticed in Campbell River a real benefit to Chinook populations and other salmon populations once we really started creating more salt marsh habitat. So seals aside, just really being able to provide a food source and cover and refugium for the salmon of all species, but in particular Chinook, will be a major sort of shining point of this from that sort of biological perspective. So I think, Tina's just noting that we have another question that was messaged to her. I think we might be able to squeeze it in. Let me just see, it's a long one, so I have to read it here. Removal of the concrete is the first step, planting indigenous plants. Oh, hang on. Looks like that's more of an answer than a question. Sorry. Are there any studies being done in the estuary on how the estuary will change to sea level rise? or any specific restoration activities being done to mitigate the effects of sea level rise through the restoration project? That sounds like a great question for Kayla as well.
Interesting with sea level rise in our area. Sea level is rising. However, our land is also rising as well. So sea level rise is the effect of sea level rise for the time being will be muted because of that. However, any restoration that we do definitely gives our environment more opportunity and more room to be resilient to sea level rise, so that species have space to move. So their habitats based on sea level rise will move, and it allows room for those habitats to shift. So restoration projects that we do, like Kuskusum, again gives room for sea level rise, both directly as well as through habitat, allowing species to move their habitats. So I think that is something that is definitely taken into consideration and is being taken into our modeling. We're working with Northwest Hydraulics, and they are modeling how this area will work in terms of hydrology, and that is definitely taking into sea level rise into consideration. But as I mentioned, it will be muted a little bit on the Vancouver Island here in the Comox Valley, because we still have some rebound happening on the land.
Great. Thanks, Kayla. And I'm sorry, I'm struggling a little bit to read questions and try to moderate the session at the same time, but it seems like I missed one from Jay that someone has asked if we can focus on. I found that question here. It's basically saying that sawmills have a lot of negative impact on estuaries, but shipping raw logs out of the Comox Valley is like shipping out jobs. Is there any vision in the Comox Valley for putting aside some industrial land where a sawmill might make sense? That's a great question, and I don't know, Doug, how did you feel about chiming in on that one?
Well, I did put a response, a brief response up on the chat box indicating that the bulk of the industrial land in the valley is actually in Cumberland, and they're working on a strategy to develop it. I'm not aware of any plans or vision around a sawmill. I think we all agree that processing timber and creating value added from it makes way more sense than shipping raw logs. But it's not something that I'm aware of there being a specific vision around. I mean, I would love to see a community managed forest with some industrial activity that made sense on a small scale. But yeah, that's a much bigger conversation than I'm aware of going on right now.
Okay, great. We might be able to squeeze in just one more question. I got one here from Jack Menard. What is the level of landowner cooperation on, I guess what he's referring to are the properties between Kuskusum up to the confluence with the Solom to create flood mitigation and refuge habitat? Is that something, Kayla, that you would feel comfortable speaking to?
So I think that might be more of a question for Doug. Seeing we're not a landowner, and we're definitely working with the city as well as anyone else, the Solom River as well, to see what can be done in that area. However, we don't have any kind of influence on, as we're not a direct owner, on that.
Yeah, I'll just comment that you'll notice the old Courtney Hotel site, there's been no building on it, and it's unlikely that new building will take place in the floodplain. I did make the reference earlier to what we're looking at developing with highways around providing some access for the floodwaters to reach the floodplain. So that sort of dialogue is going on. Interestingly enough, the people who own businesses in that area are interested in some type of a business improvement area and some sort of plan for it. So if anything like that occurs, it would obviously involve discussion on the impact of the floodplain and how we continue to manage that. So yeah, there's some dialogue, and that will have to continue. I would say that the primary thing that we're doing, though, right now relates to both Couscous and the work with highways.
Yep. So we'll just do one project at a time here, hey Jack, and we'll we'll look to the near future for where our next great miracle in floodplain restoration will happen. So with that, I think that is the end of our session. And I know we're going to be transitioning now to the next session. Megan Kersons, as I mentioned, will be the co-chair of that. I just wanted to point out that first, that next session really has to do with natural assets. And, we maybe touched on, but didn't specifically reference the Couscous project in that regard, but it certainly is one way in which we think about the project. So there's a solid connection there.